Go.
Hi, everyone. This is our podcast number 14. And the topic chosen by many people on Facebook is ontological engagement. And here are Eugene, Matusov, and me, Marjanovic-Shane, this time across the two screens, not from one screen only. So, Eugene, do you want to tell us what is ontological engagement?
That's not a very ontological question. Let me change that a little bit. Okay. Where to start? I think probably the good start is that ontological engagement probably emerges as a notion in response to conventional schooling, where students' engagement and teachers' engagements are non-ontological and kind of alienated. So neither teachers nor students are very much interested in what's going on in the classroom for different reasons. For teachers, the teacher's goal is to teach, so they're not necessarily interested in what they're teaching. And many teachers actually feel that they don't need to be interested in what they're teaching. And it's even impossible from their point of view, because they already know that what they're teaching, so they're not very they can be passionate maybe about teaching, but not necessarily passionate about what they teach. And for the students, this is kind of mandatory for them. They didn't choose to be in the classroom, either in general or in that particular classroom with this particular topic. So the topic is, it's not there necessarily a topic. And the way, since teacher controls usually everything, this is not necessarily their interest. And as a result of that, their learning is very much alienated, and which causing kind of many problems. But in a way, alienation of the students from their learning is a problem in itself, if you think about that. Although, of course, it generates many other problems, like kind of shallow learning and only I just remind a kind of common question is it will be on the test. So that as soon as the test done, in a way, students can forget that. But it's not only memory; it's about like shallowness in traditional kind of education. We talk about the lack of so-called lack of transfer and many other problems. But in my view, the biggest problem is the problem in itself.
That people are not engaged. So from what you said so far, it sounds like being interested is ontological.
No. You just said something that I want to immediately disagree. It's not that they're not engaged. They're engaged. It's not about engaged versus non-engaged. It's about what kind of engagement. Yeah, there is a problem in school of disengagement, period. But that's different problem. That it's not like the notion of ontological engagement did not emerge in response, not necessarily response. It can respond also to that disengagement in general, but it is not about disengagement. It's kind of highly engaged students, but they non-ontologically engaged. And in a way, they're failing by being successful. They may be A students, but they're because they're not ontologically engaged, for them, their learning is alienating, although they might pass all the exams and tests rather well.
Right. So I'm not saying that. I was saying that the concept of interest seems that to be a key, that the students are interested in what they are, in the subject matter, and the teacher is interested. Is it something like a key concept there?
Yes and no, because it depends how you define the word interest. Like the students might be interested in getting A, And that's why they were learning that. That's not, again, that's engagement. So there is some interest behind that. And the teachers are interested because they need to cover the curriculum. So that if you're talking about interest at that level, that no. If you're talking about like deep personal interest, yes.
Okay, so deep personal interest. So can you give example of that? You gave examples of people being engaged in getting good grades or teaching, so non-ontologically. And so give a good example, like juicy example of ontological.
Well, one of the probably like historical interesting example, in writing of Plato, and his dialogue of Meno actually starts when young man Meno comes to Socrates, who is rather old man by that time, and asks him whether or not virtues can be taught or they're innate. And this is a question that it's very clear that Meno is really deeply and personally and politically interested in that question. And the whole education is initiated by the students. I'm not saying that ontological engagement is always has to be initiated by the student, but I'm just saying that when student-initiated learning, it could be the ontological engagement much more evident. On another hand, just initiation of the student, some kind of asking for help, is not necessarily is evidence of ontological learning. Like, for example, a child might ask parents to help with the homework. It not necessarily means that its engagement was ontological. And go ahead.
Yeah. So it seems that ontological is something that really student wants to do because it's somehow important for them as person, as a being, human being.
Yes, as a human being. This is probably a key claim. So the other type of engagement, non-ontological engagement, can be, among others, instrumental. So you need something, and for that you need to do something. And that's instrumental because you constantly continue this chain of the events and find out like why. And it will be removed. Like you need grades. I'm studying because I need grade. Why do you need grade? Because I want to get to the college. Why do you need to go in college? Because I want to get a new job. Why you want to go ahead to good job? Because I want to have good life. And the question is whether or not that chain of the causes or motives will ever have any end in itself. When it has end in itself, you're probably getting to something ontological, but not.
So you want to say that the student and the teacher are interested in about some subject matter just because they're interested in, no, for any other reason. There's just something that they need to know or want to discuss.
Yes, and this is one of the way of understand ontological. I would say there are many different ways to understand it. This is more going to the kind of existential, I'm talking about like philosophical term, existentialism, understanding of the word ontological. The word ontological has so many meanings, unfortunately or fortunately. It's coming from theology, which has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. Like ontological proof of existence of God. Right. And then can go to sometimes the word deontology means actually moral, anything to moral. Again, it's nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. But I'm just saying that it's a very confusing term. But nevertheless, my sense that the word ontological in the way how we're using it now emerged probably at the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th. Somebody should do the study of that. But I found a quote from Vygotsky that he clearly, for example, used the word ontological in the way how we're using it now, like in our conversation. There is also other, the word ontological can be used to way how people conceptualize reality. Again, that's not how we're using that. We're using that like more in existentialist way, but again, it's looked like that this notion of ontology was existing much before. It's like about being. And within that being, there is at least two understanding, at least, and I'm aware of that, of the notion of ontology. That's relevant to our discussion, ontological engagement. One is kind of relevant to the like human being as kind of related to the notion of distress. So, for example, if person in pain or in hunger, like that, concerns about hunger and pain would be called quite ontological. Okay. But the other understanding of ontological, it's more existential, which is more like about being cause in itself, being a part of personal need. Need not in the as a need of self-realization, self-actualization, self-transcendence. In that sense, ontological.
So, ontological in the sense of self-realization, where you really start to engage into examining yourself, who you are, and what the world is, what the others.
Not necessarily. That could be one of that, but not necessarily. Let me give example. And this kind of example of transition from it's non-ontological engagement to ontological engagement and specifically in education. I described that example in some of my writings, so if people interested, they can ask me and I can direct them in more details about that. So I was working at the Latin American Community Center and with my students some time ago, and usually my students and I will come at the center to engage with the kids after they finish homework, because that was a practicum, teaching practicum, and the purpose of teaching practicum was just to learn how to be with kids who are culturally different than you are, and engage in the children's activities or even introduce your own, but it's the focus is not on the activity but on the being with the kids, talking with them, enjoying to be, and if you're trying to do activities, like how to do activity that can be interesting for the kids. So I came there, and the kids were mostly Mexican descent, but there are a lot of Puerto Rican kids as well, but also from Dominican Republic and from many other Latin American countries as well. So I came there, and there was a 15-year-old boy who is in high school, and he came to me and asked me to help with the homework. Again, usually we try not to engage in homework, but the kind of my personal rule will always, if the kid asks for help homework, I will help. But if some administration asks to help, I will not help. But because that's not, we didn't want to engage in homework, because in many ways in homework was very insensitive to the kids' needs and very oppressive. And we didn't want to, I didn't want my students and myself engaged kind of this oppression of the kids. So this kid asked me for help, and I thought, oh my God, now there we are. And asked him what was the homework. And he said, homework was to find the article about some journal article about scientific kind of some scientific event or discussion or something, and I'll write a report, and it's a very scripted report, where it's happened, who said that, blah, 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 blah. Very boring. I can look at that. And he said, he told me, I already found an article. And I said, okay, that's good. I looked at this article. The article was about melting ice in the Antarctica because of the global warming, something about bears and suffering of the polar bears, something like that. And I asked him, like, how did he did, and the article was from the local newspaper in Delaware. news journal, school news journal, and asked him, like, how did you choose that article? And he said, because it was short. By the way, this is a wonderful evidence of non-ontological engagement. And it makes sense.
Let's do it fast. Yes.
Let's do it fast and
get it over.
Yeah. And I actually asked him why short, and he said exactly the same thing, because it will be fast, and asked him what he's going to do when he finished that homework. And he said, I'm planning to play video games in the same room, by the way, where we were located. We were located with many computers, but the computers had double use. They can be used for homework, or they can be used for playing games. And again, I came at the time when homework's supposed to be over, but he, for some reason, procrastinated or whatever, so he wanted to do homework at that moment. And I was like thinking, what the hell? Of course I can do this writing, but it's so boring to do this. Where it's happened, like using the template, and I just like, so I decided to go for some adventure, which was kind of risky, because that adventure might be very unsuccessful. But this time it was actually successful. So I asked him whether or not, what will happen if we will choose a longer article, but very interesting. And he just looked at me, and he knew me for a long time. So he kind of grew up on my eyes, because I was at the center for a long time. So I had already a good reputation for him. So he looked at me and said, Eugene, how interesting it might be. Would be as interesting as playing games, video games? And I was thinking, well, can I promise him like that? But I decided to do, well, maybe. He said, well, if it's as interesting as playing games, I don't want to rush it. Like, of course, it can be as long as necessary to be interesting. That's another thing about ontological engagement. You don't want to rush it. If it's interesting, what's that could be rush about? And I said, okay, and ask him what he's interested about that right now. And he said, well, video games. I said, what else? And he said, well, I'm actually interested in finding music on internet, and downloaded that music. And I really did reframe that. I said, are you interested? So you're interested in music pirating? And he asked me, I said, what does it mean, music pirating? I said, well, you don't want to pay for that music, right? So it's not about finding music in a sense, finding where you can download, pay money and download. You want to find free music that you don't want to pay. And it's not necessarily free. You want to find music for which you don't want to pay. I said, that's exactly right. I said, okay, and I put in Google music pirating, and for my luck, in one of the first article in Google came up to that. It was an article in New York Times, from New York Times, and I opened this article from New York Times, and it was a long article indeed, and it was interesting article. We will start reading together with him, because the vocabulary was very difficult for him. But the subject was very interesting. It was about a retired teacher who was actually dyslexic. That's kind of important. In a moment, I'll explain why. She was accused of music pirating. But she was using, and she was sued by some big music labels. But she happens to have two sons, adult sons. And one of them was a computer programmer, and another one was a lawyer. She struck a lack of that. And
with her sons.
with two sons exactly in the right professions. So what these two sons proved that, first of all, she was using a dynamic IP. And again, we're talking about 2000s. Maybe it was 2007 or 8. I don't remember exactly. 10 years ago. And so he proved that the computer programmer, that using dynamic ID as well as she used very, very old Mac, Apple II, not Mac even, Apple II. And for the Apple II at that time, there was no peer-to-peer software from which music pirating usually happened. That's one thing. And using dynamic IP is difficult to track at that time which computer exactly was using. And the lawyer will help also to argue that in court. At the end, she won the case that they couldn't figure out like who exactly was pirated. Definitely was not her. But this boy became extremely interested in the whole article. First of all, he didn't know the word dyslexic. And so when I explained, he was shocked that the teacher who has difficulty of reading could become a teacher, any person. And then I told about myself that I have dyslexia. And he asked me a lot of questions. By the way, while we start talking, very quickly, it starts sucking kids from the playing video games to join us. And we were reading that article and together and discuss these words and what's happened. And then when we get to the, so we discussed dyslexia, then we discussed IP address, and we checked on the computers. Like, for example, we switched off the computer, started again. I showed them how to find IP. IP means Internet Protocol address. And they saw that each time the computer starts, the address changes. Okay, so they've learned about static IP address and dynamic IP address, and so then we discussed all this like lawyer and legalistic kind of things, peer-to-peer file sharing. Yes, connection, which they were using, but they didn't know that it was what it is about. So we talked about how third party can notice that and so on. And then, of course, we start discussing, it was a big discussion about music pirating. And because a lot of kids were interested how to do that. And so at the same time, I noticed that many of them wanted to start their own group, hip-hop group, and to become musician, and ask them, like, listen, how are you going to earn money if other people will pirate your music and will not pay for you? How you can survive? And so we talk about concerts and stuff like that, but concerts is only one part of money. It's not as, usually it's not that much. You really cannot survive on that. So by the way, we were checking about that, how much musicians taking from the concert, but you can Google about that as well. But, and then, so we can get to the morals of this kind of issues. But then they kind of shocked me, because they suddenly asked me, Eugene, what are you doing here at the center? And I was explaining that I'm coming with my students, and they said, but you sometimes coming without your students either as well. So why are you coming without your students? And I said, well, I'm interested about how kids learn and stuff like that. And they said, okay, what will happen in your studies? What do you do after you study? I said, well, I write articles. And they published. And they say, are you getting money from that publication? I said, no. And they said, why? I said, because the university pays me. And people, academicians can actually download my articles for free. And they say, aha, why don't university hire musicians as well? And this is university will pay and the music will be for free. It was an interesting solution they suggested. Anyway, at the end, this boy who started the whole thing, he said, no, I'm ready to write a report. And I asked him, do you need any help? And he said, no. And he said, you know what? I'm not going to use that template. I said, well, it can be dangerous because, the teacher might grade you on that. And I said, I don't care. I'm a bad student anyway, so I will write how I want to write. And I was really worried about, that he will be put down, because he wrote a very interesting report about, he basically reported on all our discussions. I wish I actually copied his report, but I didn't put that on Yeah, it was interesting. But to the credit of the teacher, the teacher gave him not only gave him A for that report, and didn't penalize that he was not using at all the template that she gave, but also she asked him to read his report on intercom for the whole school.
Oh, wow.
So she was really recognized a huge value of this his report that he made, and so that he was first A in his. I think he was in ninth grade. But that's my view of the good example of ontological engagement. It's indeed we engage in this deep meaning making, which was going deeper down. Yes, at time it was critical. At time probably it was not that critical, but we definitely was deepening, trying to deepen meaning. What does it mean dyslexic? What does it mean IP address dynamic? How people can catch you? Is it morality of the pirating alternative to that, like working against it, copyright and so on and so forth.
Well, yeah, that's definitely a lot of very, for them, interesting issues there. Yeah. Not only interesting, but that was their livelihood in some ways, because they liked that music and wanted to play that music.
And what's interesting for me also that this activity, learning activity, educational activity, was so powerful that it was able to suck the kids from the computer games, and to some degree understandable, because computer games were more or less routine, and they know that, and you have huge novelty. And again, that sucking was not complete, because sometimes kids come and go and come again, or they even were playing game, they overheard and they participated, so doing this kind of multitasking activities, and so it was not like completely, but still it was, for me, it was very interesting how much this activity was successful. As well as I've always like puzzle, like how come teachers do not create activities like that for these kids in their classrooms? Although that teacher even recognized...
Not only activity, I don't know whether I would say activity. You didn't create an activity in which you planned for that, something. It just came out, you by chance got that article online. You might have gone in a completely different way depending on what you found online.
Absolutely.
And also maybe also not successful. There is like no guarantee.
No guarantee. Yeah.
And so I think you just you described how to kind of like engage children in an ontological way, but it's a very different type of engagement than if you're trying to say, well, do this and this and this for a good grade, and describe what people have to do. So it's open-ended, and it comes from you. Your first question was for him, what are you interested in? What really is your interest? Not polar bears or whatever he was trying to read about to be quick, but something that really is his world, that makes his world.
Right. Yeah.
And so in that sense, the conventional schools rarely do that. I wouldn't say never, probably some teachers do in some situations. Like, I went to a very conventional school in Yugoslavia, but we had the that were not even considered classes, but clubs, literary club, or math club. And people came there because they wanted, and also then they chose what they wanted to read, whether it would be poetry or historical club. Like they were driving the whole activity, but the teacher is essential. And I think like you were essential for him. He couldn't have done that himself.
Yeah, well, it could be definitely with the science.
Maybe, but yeah, his whole road would be
it's true. It's a yes and no, because that's not necessarily true. Outside of the school, this kind of ontological engagement happens all the time. We engage in many interesting conversation with these kids, including this boy particular, about many different issues. By the way, that's probably why I had some reputation with him when I told that, is it okay to get longer article, but it will be interesting, because we had discussions. It's just outside, that was not phrased as education. It's just like a human being, like just being there in this community center for a long time. We ran into many interesting problems on many different issues, and so it's not that difficult. In this case, what you talked about, in my view, it's very interesting that ontological engagement, in part, heavily related to political regime under which people live. Like in school, in conventional school, they have to be there. It's not the choice to be there. You're comparing that with the clubs, when the kids can choose that, although sometimes parents choosing that for them, but they can choose that. And also condition to decide what we're going to do there. Right? It's still not guaranteed that necessarily ontological engagement, in any life you can be very bored and not engage ontologically in something. But nevertheless, it's kind of precondition for ontological engagement. In schools, when everything is kind of, everything is imposed, but not only imposed, but everything has to be done on the school kind of grounds, like you have to arrive to the preset endpoints, particular endpoints, and so all of that working against ontological engagement.
So both, I think, first of all, students have to have freedom to engage in what's something of their own interest and need, let's say, interest and need. But teachers also have to have freedom to not impose whatever the curriculum is dictating to everyone from the school authorities, but to go along with the students' needs. And many teachers would first say, I would say, like, how can I do it? I have 30 students, and imagine 30 different students. How can I teach something like that to engage students ontologically? So if everyone is different, but there are some other ways. I think we were writing about other ways that
I think we should stop and discuss that.
Okay.
It's not the other way. Like, you're raising a very good point about like how how to engage like many students. Several things about that. First of all, there is assumption that this is coming from a progressive education, that it's possible.
Yes.
Always, with any material. It's like, again, I want to remind a very famous phrase by Jerome Bruner, who was American educator and psychologist, who kind of introduced Vygotsky to United States, and who said that you can teach any child at any in any age, in any subject, but you need to do it in an honest way. And this is progressive mantra. There is always a way to how to do that. And I absolutely disagree with that. I think it's impossible. We're humans and unnecessary. It's undesirable. It's good that we're not interested in everything. It's like imagine that there is an animal or a plant that's universally good about anything, and that plant will be mediocre about everything and will actually could not survive in with the other plants and animals who are specialized. And that specialization is very important. So people are specialized by happening, by biology, by the history, and so on and so forth. They become specialized, and that's good. It means that not everything that you need to be ontologically engaged, or even ontologically but not deeply engaged. There is levels of engagement within ontological engagement. So, for example, even when I was talking about this boy, not all kids actually, I sucked some kids, that activity sucked some kids into that, and for some time, by the way, but not all kids, and that's fine. That's fine. So that's one thing. Another thing, on going to an opposite direction in a way. That's ontological engagement. It's very it has this contaminative power. It's contaminate other people, because when people are passionate about something, it becomes very interesting to see what they're doing and just maybe observe them, or even participate if you become interesting yourself. So kind of inducing ontological engagement or ontological interest, at least, when you can have peripheral in other people. And especially if we're talking children, because children are, the younger they are, the more receptive to many, many different things, because again, that specialization hasn't started yet, or it hasn't, not that deep in them.
Right, but also younger children express their joys and discoveries, the eurekas or whatever, in a more visible way that's accessible to others. So it's kind of like almost like it's so authentic that everybody gets attracted to it, because something real is happening. It's happening. I think when there is such kind of learning, like you just described, if it's learning at all, that kind of being fully engaged with something makes other people very happy too, because you're witnessing something happening that's important.
Right, and you know what? Actually, I did in preparation. I actually wanted to talk a little bit about different understanding of ontological engagement, and you kind of reminded me to do that. I've reading about ontological engagement. I found several different understanding, not how we were talking about, of ontological engagement. And right now I'm taking a few minutes to open that file about ontological engagement. And just a sec, it might, because I just, it will be nice if I provide at least names of the scholars who are using that differently. Yeah, just, I'm sorry for that. I didn't do homework. Ontological quotes for, yes, I found. The good news that I remember where I put this file. Okay. So there is takes time, sorry, it's my Word is opening. Yeah, finally it's open. So Barnett and Code, 2005, they discuss operational engagement and ontological engagement in very, very different ways that we're talking here about. For them, this is kind of situational engagement, or can be called responsive engagement. They call it operational. I don't know why. I don't know why they call it operational. In my view, again, they're trying to think about conventional schooling when it's that may be what it is. And ontological engagement for them, it's more like engagement that starts from the student. And so in this case, if you think about Meno, who came to Socrates, from Barnett and Coates, this is ontological engagement. But the boy, in my case, that I was talking about, they would probably call it non-ontological engagement, because it was pure through our discussion and not necessarily was initiated by the child. Maybe I don't know how they will think about music pirating discussion, that maybe they will say it's ontological because he was interested in that, the boy was interested in that. But discussion of dyslexia or IP address, dynamic IP address, maybe not. But I disagree with them. In my view, responsive ontological engagement and self-initiated ontological engagement can be again, it's ontological engagement. As well as opposite is also true. Not everything that people self-initiate is necessarily ontological. Like it could be very instrumental and non-ontological whatsoever. Like, for example, for some particular reason person want to decide to learn, let's say, Russian, right? And it's not necessarily ontological engagement because they need to, I don't know, to go to Russia or to do something and just, it could be very instrumental reason. And by the way, the indicators that it was non-ontological engagement, although it's self-initiated, could be the fact that they, like, looking at the clock, they may study Russian, you know, on tapes, but each time looking at the watch when it's over. And for me, this is non-ontological engagement. And reverse thing, in my view, that boy who was like, he became interested in dyslexia or discussing IP address, that's in my view a part of ontological engagement, although that's not he was not interested in advance in that. So it was not self-initiated, but in response to article and to some degree me and maybe some other children as well. So in this case, I would not look at that. Although I found this responsive authorship and self-initiated authorship is interesting ideas, but Barnett and Court are not talking about, but kind of lead to that.
Yeah, but let me ask you one thing. You know, some people try to engage children, some teachers, schools try to engage children in interesting activities like running a store in their as kind of an educational activity to learn about math, business, everything. It kind of like, it comes from, you remember that article by Van Oors where it's not really pretending, but kind of pretending because the money there is not real money. So, but it's on the verge of being real. But still there, the teacher creates the framework of the whole activity and then students are there. So they become very engaged there. I think that could be maybe that operational.
Well, for them, everything that not coming from these children is operational. So I don't know why even you talk about oral. Anything that comes not from the teachers, from Barnett and Court, everything that is operational. I don't know why they call it operational. Again, in my view, they had in mind probably conventional schooling. But since they didn't look at the other type of learning and educational situations outside of the schooling, conventional schooling, I think they missed the point, in my view. That's my criticism of them.
Right. But the reason I mentioned that, can I just say?
No, let me tell you, because we're struggling for the topics. I think you start moving to the different direction, which is very fruitful. Do you want to finish another definition of ontology?
Yes, please.
Yes. Before we're moving that.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah. So another one, which is also interesting, alternative idea of its ontological engagement is Zepke, and it's in several articles, and maybe in book as well, 2010 and 16, what I have. And this is very different. This is coming from more from social justice approach. And for Zepke, ontological engagement is political action for making society better. And that's when students engage in that, they're ontologically engaged. If they're not ontologically engaged. Again, I'm taking I have a problem. I kind of appreciate that as well as having problem with that. Part of that, I appreciate that it's this kind of approach coming from a long tradition, let's say Hannah Arendt, who is referring back to Aristotle, when the idea of citizen is one who is political. And so for that, if you're not political, it means you're an idiot. And I just want to know that idiot in Greek, in Greek, means person who doesn't participate in communal affairs, or who are not interested in participating in that. And this case, ontology is defined as political action. And again, I disagree with that. I agree with that political action, participation in political action can be ontological, but it can be non-ontological as well. And it could be instrumental. I might dare to say that so like our president right now, heavily participating in political action, but I'm not sure he's ontological. Not because he's not doing something what I would consider good for society or bad for the society. I just think that a lot of his action based on his narcissism and, and even engaging in politics, and part of that it's about like almost like his own therapeutic almost for himself. He feels good about by putting other people down, by winning. It's like a sport for him. It's not necessarily all this politics. That's why he's wavering often one way or to another.
To play the devil, why is not that ontological for him? That's what he likes to do.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying it's not Anna. That's That's not devil, because we're talking about particular ontological from the definition that Zepkis provides.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about that definition, like not everything engaging in betterment of the society. Some people, like helping other people, it can be a very ontological thing, but can be very non-ontological, can be cumbersome for other people, or they might do for manipulative reasons, and so on and so forth. So I disagree with that. Also, in an opposite direction, why is it politics or embetterment of the society is the only thing? I'm against any attempts to totalizing anything, including social justice. And in social justice colleagues of mine in education, there is unfortunately tendency for totalizing everything around social justice. Education is about social justice. And my answer is no, it's not. Education is education, social justice, social justice. They can have overlap, but that's it. It's overlap.
Right. Yeah, right. Somebody may be interested really just to learn music, and that's what they're interested in.
Yeah, and they are idiots from the ancient Greek definition, and let it be. There is nothing wrong about, from my point of view, of people not interested in communal life. It may be shocking to say that, but it's okay in my view. There is a lot of diversity of the people, diversity of interest, and it's fine that some people interested in one thing and not interested in another. Now let's go ahead.
Okay, that doesn't matter. Some people, not at the same time in your life, you have to be interested.
Sure, absolutely right.
They become sometimes interested, but in some other
or some people not interested at all, and that's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
So to come back to what I wanted to say before.
Yeah, please.
What looked to me that Barnett and Coate were describing as operational engagement is some kind of hands-on activity. People get excited if they actively participate, do operations of either experiment or whatever. So hands-on, that kind of, to me, that looked like that. Still not ontological from it can become. But many times people say, as long as you have lots of hands-on activities, children, students will stay engaged because they will be doing something instead of just listening.
And this leads to another interesting topic, which is around ontological engagement, which is one is ontological engagement, which is like creating these hands-on activities exactly in order to kids get engaged in something. Or in other things is exploitation of ontological engagement, which is again around the same topic. But let me separate pseudo-ontological engagement and exploitation of ontological engagement. Pseudo-ontological engagements happen when actually it's not ontological, but there is attempts to create kind of ontological engagement. Let me give few examples in educational realm. Like if you watch the movie Freedom Writers, It's an American movie about innovative teacher. What's her name? Erin.
Miss Erin Gruel.
Gruel, yes, Gruel, yes. And they wrote actually a book together she wrote a book together with her students about their experiences, and the movie based on that. So in the movie, if you watch that movie, which is very interesting, she portrays herself as a new teacher coming to this urban school in Los Angeles, high school, and she's teaching English. And she came with this progressive view that everything possible to teach in honest way, and also she came with this idea of culture-driven pedagogy. So everything should be taught within the culture of the students, right? So she according to her kind of curriculum, which was prescribed. I don't think she chose that. She's supposed to teach them about Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey. And she wrote like 5 or 6 statements on the blackboard. Actually, we might include this picture in the in that video. About Odyssey. And she is trying to use like language, imagined language from the kids' communities, like Odyssey was raised in the tough neighborhood. There was police brutality and stuff like that. And this is
Odysseus, right?
Right.
Odysseus was raised.
Yes, what was raised in the Odysseus was raised in the tough neighborhood with police brutality, and you will see that examples actually, because I captured them from the video, and you can read even what they wrote. And the reaction of the students, like they immediately recognize that manipulation. The teacher tried to use the context. And also it's a caricature context, because the teacher's coming, she doesn't know much about realities of their communities, but she thinks that she knows. So there's many layers. But for younger kids, they might not fully recognize that. And so local teachers will use fairy tales, for example, for kind of, but kids might not be nevertheless engaged at all in that. So it's a teacher's projection of that ontology, of the kids' ontology in the teaching. Like another funny example that I noticed in the University of Delaware, it's probably some math educators, and they wrote, there's a poster that left from one of the classes, and the poster says like, this is contextual math problems, real world life problems versus non-contextual, non-real world. And the real world problem was example of that, was like that. It started like that. Your mother owns a construction factory. And then something that completely nothing to do with the problems that ever in any factory will emerge, it's there. But this, using that ontological, projected ontological context, your mother owns construction factory. It's very interesting in my view, example of a pseudo-ontological engagement, and it's kind of trying to put this ontology, kids' ontology there, but in a very fake way. And that's one problem. But another one, different one, which is exploitation of ontological engagement. In this case, ontological engagement is actually real, but it's used for, smuggling the academic curriculum.
So can that example that we heard from somebody, that a math teacher who was working in some kind of a very bad neighborhood in Brazil, in a town where there is a lot of criminal and prostitution, and so she was using, or he was using, the example of math, like 1 gram of
Anna, I cannot judge that case. I don't know that case well.
Okay, so I'm just trying to visualize. Like,
no, that's not the case. I would not. This is not that easy. You need to really, and especially that exploitation moment, because you cannot just bring easily a case. But let me give an example of the case that I know pretty well because it was a doctoral dissertation by Mark Smith. And so since I was his advisor, I heavily was involved in the case, in analysis of case, and actually video observed the case because it was videotech. And the case was like that. It was progressive and progressive school, where teachers want, this is middle school, progressive middle school. And the teacher want to teach the era of exploration, which is like European, late Middle Ages, emergence of almost like Renaissance, 14th, 15th century, where suddenly in Europe there is a new phenomenon developed, which is start exploration. Of course, the biggest exploration was finding so-called discovery of America. And the teachers want to teach, which is they knew in advance what they want kids to come to, and it was that trades leads to age of exploration. It forcing people to explore. The trades leads this age of exploration, which is, in my view, not exactly right idea if you think about that. For one simple, there are many reasons why it's wrong idea. If you talk with the historians and they find that it's, but just on the logical level, it's the trade is mutual. Yeah, and usually with Europe, they talk about trade with Asia, with China, India, and so forth. Like that's why, like Magellan trying to travel and many others, or Columbus went to the to find another route to the India. But trade is mutual. But age of exploration started not on mutual sides. It started in Europe. It doesn't mean that there was no some kind of exploration in China, but it was much, much, much more limited. So there is definitely a symmetry there, but the teachers presented kind of the idea for them, it was trades starts age of exploration. So what they did, they engaged kids in the trading. So there was kind of simulated game of trading. And very quickly, the kids kind of start running into the same problem what I was talking about, that the trade actually is mutual. So why is it that exploration started in one place and not in all places, since it's mutual, right? And the teachers just, they know what they have to do. So they start overruling the kids' ontological engagement. They managed to create ontological engagement studying trades, but that studying trades did not lead to exploration and and that European exploration that they wanted to simulate. But they tried to impose on that. So it was very interesting how that exploration in part was unusual because usually people really exploit things. Here they kind of, in my view, it was not very thoughtful for them, and they didn't realize that themselves didn't know why age of exploration happened. And instead of problematizing that, which is what could be very interesting, focusing on trade, they wanted to impose on the kids. At the end of the day, whole activity collapsed because the kids quickly realized that the teachers absolutely not interested in their reflection about their experiences in that simulated activity, but they were extremely interested about imposing endpoints that the age of exploration resulted from the trading and was caused by the trades, which was not necessarily the case. But again, this is very particular case. There is other cases where exploitation is done much more intentional than this case. In this case, the exploitation kind of emerged. And so
exploitation of real engagement, real ontological.
Yeah. And in this case, it was ontological. The kids were engaged in game rather ontological. But it could be a lot of engagement in the games, like we start game, but the focus is not on the game, but on one academic curriculum which is not organic for the game. It's not like the problem of the game that leads to some interesting academic learning, but it was the focus is just to provoke them and then hijack it and studying something else, which is nothing necessarily to do with the game itself.
Can you think about the fifth dimension like that? The whole program that organized from social cultural approach, or can it be like that?
Yeah, in my view, again, I cannot talk for whole fifth dimension, Mike. By the way, when you say fifth dimension, do you know that you're talking in tongues right now? What's fifth dimension?
Fifth dimension, a project to engage kids of various cultures in academic studies through their after-school activities by organizing games that have this kind of property to engage children to do some other academic work within those games.
Again, let's provide context. It started by Michael Cole and his colleagues in the United States and become kind of international endeavor. I don't know how much I would agree that everybody is like that, but there is definitely one version of fifth dimension. And by the way, the fifth, why it's called fifth dimension? Why is it called fifth dimension, Anna?
I don't know. I don't really know myself.
Well, it's coming from writing of Vygotsky, who said there is, it's kind of Vygotsky chronotop in a way. He talked that there is three dimensions of the space, one dimension of time, and the fifth dimension of meaning.
Okay.
That's why it's called fifth dimension. Yes, in part of that, the fifth dimension program, in part of this was sold to the society to get money, for example. And some people probably believed in that. I don't know how much it's part of the sustainability issue or really true belief, but part of that is to show that the kids from disadvantaged communities can progress through the informal learning of the games with where this kind of academic things they're hidden there inside of them. And game was kind of delivery part. But again, for me, it's difficult to know whether or not they really try to hijack ontological engagement, or they saw that as byproduct of the games. Again, an analysis of particular things is necessary. I cannot judge.
That's true. I just wanted to mention that it sounded to me like
I don't know. No, it can sound one way or another, because there is another thing. There is a lot of things people learn as a byproduct of activities, and not necessarily hijacking. That's very different things from hijacking, in my view.
Okay, so I agree. It's probably much more complex and it works different with different kids and different teachers and different probably settings.
Not only and different people who organize fifth dimension. I can definitely recognize in some of them. I remember presentation of the conferences of fifth dimension, exactly what you're talking about that. But at the same time, I know some other examples that, again, for me, it's difficult to just say fifth dimension. I don't know whether or not I can generalize like that. And definitely in the what I call bastardized version of fifth dimension that we were engaged, we didn't have this. First of all, kids were selecting games, any games that they want. It's not us, and we didn't kind of control what they play, when they play. We didn't have so-called maze or sequence of the activities and learning, and we didn't do testing of them about anything. So.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I just think that there is partially that kind of idea that in informal activities, kids will get genuinely excited about something, and that may lead to real learning.
I'm not sure. I'm sure I don't understand real learning. What you just said.
really ontological learning in that sense. If the kids already are fully excited, they can find something really important in that. That's what I mean.
You know, you touch interesting things, because for me, you shifted from ontological engagement to ontological learning.
Yes.
Did you notice that? Okay.
Yeah, I did, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and my view, ontological learning happens anytime, about anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big contribution by Eugene for my thinking about that. The question is what they learn. That's the question, ontologically. And they always learn ontologically. Like, for example, in the school, they might learn that the math is boring. And that learning is very ontological. The learning of fractions may be not ontological. But the learning that the math is boring is very ontological for students.
Yeah, that's a totally different idea.
Yeah, in this case, ontological, I agree with Jean Leif, although she didn't use the term ontological learning, but I would she called it student curriculum. But I agree with her that ontological learning happens all the time. The question is what's the content? The presence of ontological learning is not problematic. The content of it is.
Right.
And the reason why ontological learning happens all the time is because whatever we do, we live. It's about being. In order to get out of being, we have to die. But if we're not dead, it means we're in the being. And in the being, that means that's why it's always ontological learning always happen. The question is what its content. That's a good question. It's not necessarily academic content. Or by academic, I mean what school wants, or what Jean Leif called teaching curriculum, intended curriculum by the teacher. And that's not necessarily the case. That type of learning might be not necessarily ontological, but ontological learning always happens.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike ontological engagement. In this case, it's very different concept.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what's the difference then, if there is any difference, between ontological engagement that some teachers or some schools try to provoke in order to teach prescribed and preset endpoints, and dialogical pedagogy ontological engagement?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that the schools, conventional schools, are very much interested in ontological engagement. When they're interested, it's usually either exploitative or pseudo-ontological. When they're interested. By the way, exploitation, ontological engagement, let me give example, because we're living without example. You trying to give your own example, and for me, they're very problematic. Let me give example very clear, like exploiting hip-hop to memorizing math rules. You know, there is a lot of idea about like using hip-hop or some other pop culture to just for kids to better memorize whatever can be called school crap. And that's one way. But it could be much more sophisticated than that. It could be much more sophisticated. So we start playing one thing, and then we will start one thing, and then we switch to the studying this curriculum. So it's almost like has kind of two stages. First stage is ontological engagement, and the second stage, hijacking to the academic curriculum, which is very little to do with this ontological engagement. Okay. So what you were asking, the school, conventional schools. So I would say schools don't have much interest in that. But besides hijacking, the reason why it's difficult for conventional school to really to get into ontological engagement, because it's political reason. Ontological engagement, it's a free thing. You don't know where you're going. You don't know what you will learn. It's the curriculum is emergent. You know, it requires freedom. Freedom also non-participation. freedom of disengagement, and freedom of changing topic, and so on and so forth, which is conventional school is afraid of. That's for them, it's a rebellion. For them, it's a mess. It's out of control. So that's why conventional school is very, and it will never guarantee, it's risky. And it's going to the forbidden topics, because usually ontology, part of the ontology makes it very interesting. It's going to the taboo topics, societal taboos. And especially when it's children doing that, well, even when adults is doing that, it's a big issue. But when the children is doing that, it's a big problem. It's like once Michael Cole said, and unfortunately I forgot, he said it beautifully, and we talk on the phone, and unfortunately I should have written it down immediately, that wisdom. He said basically, whatever kids really interested in, which can be called ontologically interested in, it's bothers adults. And I actually have many examples of that. And that's part of the school. It's conventional institution, doesn't fit ontological engagement whatsoever.
So can school be changed, or can education ever be ontological in any schooling institution? Fully ontological.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And there is many levels of your deep question that you ask. One is about whether or not schools can be changed while remaining to be an institution. And another thing, whether or not the institution, any institution, doesn't matter which one, compatible with the notion of ontological engagement. That's a very good question.
Can institutions support ontological engagement of students or learners?
Support maybe, a little bit support, but it cannot happen in the institution. In the institution is constantly at odds with ontological engagement and dialogism, by the way, in general, especially Bakhtinian ontological dialogism. The reason for that, because institution is a mechanism. It's kind of human organizational mechanism. And dialogism and ontological engagement is deeply anti-mechanistic. So mechanism, like anything else, can be helpful, and but it should be hold on tight leash, because as soon as institutional unleashed, and we're living in the societies where institutions are ruling, they're absolutely unleashed. And in this case, I doubt that any institution is compatible. As ruling, as a body that rules the practice and communication and human relations. In this case, ontological engagement and dialogism is anti-institutional.
Right.
Anna, we're running more than 1 hour. Should we stop?
I know. Just one more question and then we will stop. What about democratic schools? Well, democratic schools, and again, as far as I know a little bit, I never visited Summerhill, which is that British, probably famous school that started by Neil, and soon we will celebrate, whole humanity should celebrate 100 years. Something happened to the sound now. I cannot hear you well. Okay. Can you say something?
I'm saying something. Okay. Maybe it's time to finish. That's what.
Yes, maybe it's time to finish.